All right. Well, welcome. Kirsty, thank you so much for joining me today. I think it's always great to have people sort of start off by introducing themselves. So can you please let people know who you are and what you do?
Thanks very much. No, it's such a privilege to be here. So thanks for having me. My name's Kirsty Pott, and I'm in South Africa, in Johannesburg. And I work for a company called JVR Psychometrics. We form part of 3 companies that fall under the JVR Africa group. So I'm a psychometrist by profession. I'm also an account manager, so do a lot of advising around assessments. I get to train on some assessments, and that's what makes me incredibly happy. Because the training is definitely my passion. And the assessment I tend to train the most on is the Briggs Type Indicator. And that's also one of my favorite assessments, just in terms of, self-awareness, getting to know yourself, understanding others, and just the applications in everyday life. With my kids, I've got 3 of them, ranging from 15 all the way down to 10.
Yeah.
It definitely helps. I don't get it right very often. But it certainly helps why I say the things I do, why they respond the way they might. I'm also, so when I'm not trying to raise 3 kids and try and get it right. I'm also a paddler. Done a couple of big rivers here in South Africa. And an adventurer when we're allowed out and about. That's a little bit about me.
I love that. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I also love to ask, maybe we could talk a little bit about how we actually met, because we met because of your work with MBTI and psychometric assessments.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because you got in touch with the Myers-Briggs company with an interest in the assessment, and we're the distributors in Sub-Saharan Africa. So if you get in touch with them, they give your details to us, just because we're a little bit more local. It's a little bit easier to make someone, contact with someone who's that much closer. I mean, it wasn't that much closer for us because at the time you were in Nigeria, and we're obviously based in South Africa. That was the connection. And then, there were a couple of emails. We had a bit of a Skype session. And then the next thing, you were on a plane in Cape Town.
Yeah.
And you came for the training.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for me, the MBTI has been such an interesting instrument. I think very similar to you, sort of using it day to day, leveraging it really to get the best out of yourselves and see how to also engage better with others. So I'm just really curious, how did you become introduced to these sorts of assessments? You mentioned that you're, I can never say this right, but you work with psychometrics. I had never heard of that particular occupation until I came to South Africa, until I had the chance actually to engage with you.
Yeah, well, I'm not gonna lie. I hadn't heard about it either until about 7 years ago. I left school, went to varsity. I was quite adamant I was going to be a psychologist, and I was going to save the world, and I was going to understand myself and understand other people. And it didn't really work that way. So I ended up moving. I did a teacher's diploma as well. I got sidetracked by kids. And then, fate put a bit of a spanner in the works, and we moved from Pietermaritzburg, which is in KwaZulu-Natal, a little bit inland in South Africa. So it's a bit further away than where I am now in Johannesburg. And suddenly you had to pack up everything, move to Johannesburg. And I realized that I was kind of stuck in a little bit of a rut. So I was chatting to a cousin of mine who, interestingly enough, was the MBTI trainer for JVR at the time.
Oh, wow.
And she said to me, well, have you ever considered, doing psychometrics? And I looked at her with a very blank face, and I said, sorry, what? And so I understand completely where you're coming from with that. And she invited me around to the JVR offices. I got the opportunity to walk around, chat to, some of the psychometrists that were there, some of the interns, because JVR has been incredibly involved with the psychometry interns, taking them through their internship, offering training courses. We also work very closely with the university, and we go in and we ran a couple of workshops with the interns. So it really, it was such good timing, and it was networking and knowing the right people who said the right thing at the right time. And then the next thing I knew, I'd applied, I was accepted. I was probably one of the older interns on the course, with 3 kids, back home and what have you. But it was amazing, and I was fortunate enough to do my internship at JVR. And being a well, a psychometric, an assessment distributor.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there were access to so many different assessments, so many different minds. We've got psychometrists, we've got industrial psychologists, we've got clinical psychologists, we've got educational psychologists, all in the organization. So there was just so many brains to pick, and so many people to ask for advice and for suggestions. So it was a fantastic opportunity. And 6 months after I started my internship, I begged to stay, and they kept me. And it was amazing. And that was really where I got introduced to the MBTI, because as I said, JVR are the sole distributors. So we're very involved in the training, running workshops, using the assessment, and we live and breathe the MBTI culture. You kind of arrive at JVR and you get your 4-letter type, and then you're one of the family, one of the team. And I remember when I arrived and was introduced, and I just loved the tool. It made so much sense. It was just such an easy way to kind of identify your preferences, identify the reasons behind why you might respond in the way you do, why other people say the things they say, or you might experience some people it's just so much easier to get along with, and other people are a little bit more difficult to understand. And I just remember thinking, this makes so much sense. I love this tool. And then slowly, year after year, having asked and suggested and put down all the reasons why I really should be involved in the training, I was eventually invited to become one of the trainers, which was it was fantastic. So I get to train people to use the assessment, because you do need to be certified just to get a better understanding. And I mean, you'll know that as much as value as you can get from just the 4 letters, going through the training and understand how they work dynamically together, understand where the tool came from, understand just more about the assessment. You can really pick out a lot more information. You can assist people better. You can understand better. It was a wonderful journey. And now we're kind of into our next phase. We did our first virtual training for the MBTI quite recently. So we're being shoved into the 21st century with a solid thump. And we landed well. So that was awesome. So yeah.
Amazing. And sorry, just back to this, can you maybe explain the difference between like a psychologist and I'm always terrible at saying it, but psychometrist. Yeah. So what's the difference? Yeah.
So basically, in my opinion, the psychometrists do all the fun stuff.
Yes.
So it also, I suppose a lot of it would depend on where you are in the world. I'm not entirely sure if a psychometrist as a profession exists beyond South Africa, to be perfectly honest. I know there are psychometricians that do develop assessments and are a lot more statistical in nature. But here in South Africa, psychometrists work with psychological assessments. We're allowed to kind of assist in development, assist in feedback, assist people to use that psychological knowledge, the knowledge from the psychological assessment, either to make selection decisions, development decisions. So it's almost the easier side of psychology. So I can't diagnose you. I can't do anything clinical with that information, because I don't have that psychology degree behind me. And then here in South Africa, we've got a couple of different kinds of psychologists. So the industrial psychologists obviously focus a lot more in the corporate space, the health of an organization and the people within an organization. Your more clinical psychologists obviously deal with the clinical side of things, the diagnosis, working with people, usually with kind of deeper seated issues. Educational psychologists would be with people in the educational space, and then very recently we've now actually got a neurological psychologist, and you can actually study and qualify as a neurological psychologist. I mean, it's brand new. It really is a very new registration. But yeah, so you can almost imagine how there is quite a bit of overlap with some of the different registrations. It can get a little bit tricky. You've counseled someone all the way up until they turn 18, they leave school, and now do you hand them over to someone else? Because as an educational psychologist now, maybe that age group doesn't fit in with your particular scope. So there are a couple of grey lines, but yeah, generally speaking, there are differences. But I can't counsel. I can't do any in-depth counseling. I can't do any diagnosis. I can't do any projective testing, or nothing that's going to need me to be kind of qualified in a more clinical manner. So it's the good stuff, I think.
I know, I love that. And in terms of the good stuff, let's talk about like what you actually can share. Because I think there's a lot of misconceptions on like how MBTI and other assessments can be used. Can you tell us a little bit about how you can use the MBTI?
Okay, well, specifically with the MBTI, it has been designed and it's been developed basically for development. So there are so many different applications where you can actually use it, but it is only in the development space. So developing people, developing relationships, developing teams, developing communication, developing your ability to deal with conflict, your ability to manage change. You can use it with your significant others. You can use it with your kids to understand each other better, respond better in certain situations. But under no circumstances ever must it ever be used to select people into a role, into a job. It really just hasn't been designed for that at all. And most of the criticism that people have, and if you Google MBTI, there'll be some really interesting articles. There'll be a load of nonsense that you can find, and there will also be criticisms. And those criticisms always come out from when people use it incorrectly. They'll say, well, the MBTI does not predict job performance, and no, it doesn't. But it was never designed to do that. So if you want to predict job performance, use a tool that's been designed to do it. And has been validated to do it, and then you won't be so disappointed. But no, the MBTI is for development, self-awareness, self-understanding, and understanding of others.
Yeah. Thank you for sort of sharing that with us. And in terms of like where we are now and all this uncertainty, one of the reasons why we actually got back in touch is because you shared this really interesting resource with me. How can people sort of leverage an assessment like the MBTI to understand how to deal with change and crisis better?
Yeah, no, well, absolutely. I mean, so one of the things, I mean, the MBTI, as I said, can be applied in so many different ways. And now, I mean, we're living in this whole new world where communication becomes so much more important because you're not bumping into people in the hallway anymore. You can't just pop into someone's office and connect. So in terms of an understanding of the way you communicate, maybe, and the way other people need to be communicated with, knowing your 4-letter type and knowing what you need and how you'll tend to communicate, and knowing whether or not that'll match with people in your team or even, I mean, and obviously our work is so focused on organizations and, people in the workplace, but exactly the same can be applied across the board, to your mum who's based in another province or another country, or to, family members. So understanding the kind of communication that you would tend to default to and what others need, you can perhaps adjust the way you communicate with individuals, to better suit their need. But then also understand that if somebody is very short and to the point and quite task focused, it's not necessarily that they're rude or aloof or abrupt or just, a really nasty person. It might just be that that's their default. They might just be far more to the point, a lot more logical and analytical in their approach. Whereas for you, you might be more in need of a little bit more connection and, building the relationships and the communication. So you will tend to ask a lot more, how's everyone doing? Where are you at the moment? And just an understanding that your different styles can impact on the conversations, and more so that we're relying completely on conversations, a little bit less on body language and that sort of thing. But I think most importantly for me at the moment is that, I mean, obviously, people are, in a lot of cases, are probably living in a slightly stressed manner. So there's a very good chance that we're all operating in our least, in our most overwhelmed state in certain situations. And again, that understanding of where you're at, are you operating from a place of stress? You know, is your seemingly bizarre behavior actually rooted in that? And with the MBTI, what we look at is we look at individuals kind of as they work through the process of your ideal self. As the world or environment gets a little bit more stressful, your ideal self, you kind of lean into that a little bit more, and that ideal self starts getting a little bit manic, a little bit more frantic, a little bit less managed. And if that doesn't ease up, you can go into what we call the grip. So you move into a state where we say that you're in the grip, and this is where you're kind of your least developed part of yourself comes to the fore. And it can, I mean, it can embarrass you. It can be misunderstood by other people. It can land you in hot water if you're not managing that. So again, just being able to identify within yourself, you know, where am I now? And, you know, maybe manage that a little bit better. But the same as you can manage yourself, you can also understand why other people might respond in the way that they do. You know, and again, it's not that they're unreasonable. It's not that they just being otherwise. It's just that empathy. You know, people aren't in their best possible state at the moment. And you can start identifying that. And this just gives you a framework to help you to do so. Because sometimes we get so caught up in our own lives, and we get so caught up in be like me syndrome. You know, well, this is how I'd respond. Why on earth are you doing it differently? Or, you know, I would never have said something like that. Where on earth did that come from? So just creating that awareness, empathy, just to deal with people a little bit, you know, nicer, or better, more kindly at the moment. And I think, I mean, genuinely, that's the best that we can do. The world is on its ear. It's insane, and it's not just you in Ghana or me in Johannesburg. It's the entire world. We might be at different phases or stages, but you know, and I think kindness right now it's just so important. We need to treat ourselves with kindness, and treat other people with kindness as well. So I think this is a great tool. And also, you know, some of the other resources that I did send through to you as well. Yeah. Just helping individuals. Many of us, I know, have kind of all disappeared into our homes. We've closed the doors. Where we've been allowed to, and you know, unfortunately, one of those lucky people that have been able to continue to work from home. But it also, you know, just knowing your MBTI type, you'll be able to have a better understanding, you know, for what are the areas that you're going to really revel in, and you know, maybe excel in, where working from home is going to work for you, and where working from home might not. And then also, you know, when you know that, you can highlight and identify the areas that you need to be a little bit more aware of. So for me, I'm an ENFP, according to the MBTI. So that means I have a preference for extroversion, a preference for intuition when I gather information. When I make a decision, I do it from a values base. That's the F, with a feeling preference. And I tend not to structure my world too carefully. I have a preference for perceiving, and that's the P. So I like to be open to new information. I don't like to come to closure too much. So for me, working from home, I know I'm going to miss people. So what do I do in my life to make sure that doesn't get me down, and I don't kind of lose energy, you know, become too miserable and sad or what have you. I also know that I have with my NP preference, I am going to be a lot less, well, I can still create the structure in my life. It's just not going to be my default. So what I need to do is I need to be particularly careful that I create some sort of structure in my life so that I'm able to follow through with it. And at the end of the day, I've actually, you know, achieved what I set out to achieve, and I don't get too distracted by, you know, new bits of information or, you know, new things that I start pursuing. So knowing my type and knowing what's going to potentially trip me up, knowing the areas that I'm going to get a little bit stuck on, I can just manage that a little bit better. And the same for all the other types. There are going to be areas that you will really excel in, and you know, being at home is going to speak to your soul in certain ways. But there are also going to be other areas that are going to bring challenges, and you know, how do you deal with it and how do you manage it?
Amazing. Thank you so much for taking us through that. That was actually going to be my next question. Like, would you mind sort of sharing what that looks like in practice? And I have to say, thanks to the training, that's really what I think about as well, even in terms of the work that I do, because a lot of my work now is I'm doing by myself, right? It's a lot of project-based work. You know, I am the one who has the connection with whatever customer or client I have. And I feel like it definitely suits me a lot more than what I was doing previously. Even though I did enjoy it, I definitely feel like what I'm doing now suits me a lot more. And I love using my MBTI to help me think about what sort of pitfalls could be there, right? What should I keep in mind? What do I need to share with my clients so they know how to get the best out of me? So yeah, I really appreciate you taking us through that. I think one question that a lot of people tend to have around the MBTI is, can my letters change? We've talked a little bit about this when I did the training, but I'd love to sort of have you share that again, that those thoughts around the letters changing and in terms of aging, what that might look like.
Yeah, no, 100%. So if you're going to take the assessment at some point, a couple of years later, you take it again, there is every possibility that your letters do change. But we need to go a little bit, go back into the theory. And according to the theory, your innate preferences do not change. But the way you respond to the assessment at different times might change. So what you get at the end of the day when you take the assessment is you're in a particular space where you're answering based on what is happening in your life. So your behaviors might change, which is why you might answer the assessment differently. And there the question will be, well, what in my life has changed when I took it 10 years ago to when I took it now? Have I developed a little bit more? Do I know myself a little bit better? When I took it 10 years ago, I was probably quite new to the organization. I was really trying to, fit a role that I thought they wanted me to take on. I really thought that this was the person that they wanted. So I answered the assessment with that in mind. So it's the external environment that's impacted the way you've answered the assessment. Whereas maybe 10 years later, you're a lot more comfortable with who you are. You've kind of gone through a process of development. You no longer feel like you need to, accommodate the world to quite the same extent, but rather, you're exploring different parts of who you are and are able to be a little bit more authentic. So, 10 years later, you might answer it much truer to who you are. So your innate self hasn't changed over time. Just the environment and those environmental pressures, as it is, they might be different, and that's why your 4-letter type can change. So the way that you answer the assessment, but innately, according to Jung's theory, who you are doesn't change. Does that make sense?
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And that's one of the things, when I do the assessment, even with my clients, you try to set it up, right? I think we were told, like, imagine you're on a deserted island, or imagine like you have no responsibilities, like, who are you, right? Trying to set that stage, trying to help reduce that environmental, I guess, element around it, because I do think it sort of changes. For me, I think there was a difference in the F and T. So that's the feeling and thinking. So previously I did a lot of work on teams. I was, responsible for teams and things like that. And now that I work for myself, I think it's more of me reverting to my natural preference for thinking, because I do work with teams still in a way, but it's a very different sort of relationship, where before I was directly responsible for them. And now, which I think is my natural preference, it's a very different type of engagement.
Yeah. And that also speaks to, every now and again you hear people say, oh, but the MBTI puts you in a box and it labels you. And it actually, it really doesn't. Because within your letter, you can still do opposite behaviors.
Yes.
So you've got a preference for thinking, but when the environment called for it, you could be so much more empathetic. Make sure that, people's needs were met. Decisions could be made with people in mind, even though your innate preference is to be a lot more logical, a lot more analytical, a lot more objective about your decision-making process. You still can, enact the behaviors or do what the opposite side does. And that's also, it's never an excuse. So I with a preference for P, so with a preference for perceiving, I don't like to come to closure. I prefer not to make decisions too soon. I have an innate fear that I'm going to miss out on a useful piece of information, a useful outing. So for me, my natural preference is to leave things open as long as I possibly can. And that's not to say that I'm not conscientious, or I just can't get stuff done. It's just an innate need not to close something too soon and miss anything out. I can still meet deadlines. I can still manage my time. I have to tell you, I was waiting for your call well within the.
You were earlier than I was.
I was
you were
early.
there a few minutes before I was, and I have a J. Just so.
So it's never an excuse for bad behavior. We can behave as the situation calls for it, and we can learn the correct behaviors or the more appropriate behaviors in a situation. But knowing what your innate preference is, you get a feel for what is my default, and what is going to energize me more. Because if I work in an environment where there is a need for me to be very structured and very organized and very timeous, I can absolutely do that. I am going to be really, really tired if that's all that I ever do. So just knowing that, and I'm probably also going to feel quite drained as well. So where can I energize myself in an environment where I can be more spontaneous, be more open-ended, and perhaps that's in my downtime or whatever it might be. So just that awareness, that you can behave appropriately, but you also know, what is going to energize you. And ideally craft your role or craft some space in your life where you can re-energize according to what your preferences and your needs are. And I mean, obviously the MBTI is an incredible tool, and I'm very, very much a proponent of it. And I do think it offers enormous value, but it doesn't tell us everything there is to know about you. It gives us a framework. It gives us a really nice structure, but there's way more to you, and there's way more to me than our 4 letters. We're far more interesting and far more, fun than that. So it's a really nice framework, a nice lens, but it's not everything.
Yeah, no, great. And I appreciate you sort of sharing the fact that it's a framework, because that's why I think it can be very powerful, because it allows people to have conversations. When I talk to people about using it, I say it's like you said, it's a tool. It's not the end all, it's not the be all, it's not meant to define you, but it's a great way to start having a conversation with yourself and others. And at the end of the day, that's what, that type of assessment is really meant for, to help you have that conversation, help you see where you want to develop, and where you feel like you might need to develop as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the really nice things that I love about this particular assessment, is and also, fits my need, just for positivity with people. Every single type comes with a strength and comes with a development area. You do need both sides of the coin in order to function. And I think a lot of type development speaks to that. It's knowing, what is my preference? What is my default? Where is that appropriate? And where do I need to start practicing other behaviors, because those behaviors are slightly better. So it doesn't matter. As with a preference for extroversion, I'm going to have certain strengths. Meeting people energizes me, connecting people energizes me. And there are going to be times where that is definitely of benefit. But there are also going to be other times where I try and fill the silence, because my preference for extroversion means that long silences are not a good thing. And I might just talk and talk and talk and not stop, to be comfortable in that silence, and perhaps listen and give an introverted preference the opportunity to mull over what I've said before they respond. So that's my learning, that's my challenge, that's my stretch as an extrovert, to learn, when my natural preference will stand me in good stead, and where it might mean that, I miss out on something because I'm so busy trying to fill what I think is a terrible silence.
Yeah, fair. All right. Well, I mean, I'd love to sort of wrap this up by asking sort of what's sort of next for you? What are you excited about moving forward?
Well, I think the most exciting thing at the moment with the MBTI is, as I mentioned earlier, we have gone virtual. So our training is now available. You can be anywhere, and you can join in via Zoom, and you can attend the training, become certified. We ran our first virtual training, I think it was a month and a bit ago, and it went really, really well. The response was phenomenal. I think I was telling you a little bit earlier, I had a little bit of an oops moment where my 10-month-old puppy came in and tried to pull me off the chair. But it's, it was fine. And it's in lieu of actually standing in front of people, and being able to connect, face to face. These funny little things that happen while we're all in the comfort of our homes brings us together, gives us something to laugh about. But it does just mean that we can extend our reach a little bit further. For people that might have struggled to fly through to Joburg or Cape Town to do the training, can now access it. So that's fantastic. I'm really hoping. I mean, I'm a people person, definitely, without a shadow of a doubt. So the opportunity, to meet people further afield, I think that'll be fantastic. I'm really looking forward to that. So that's the next big thing. Our next training is the end of August. Then we've got another one in November. And then, as long as we need to be virtual, we can continue to do so. And also, I mean, if there are, going forward, we're going to have people further afield who'd like to take up that opportunity. I'm quite certain we'll have that in place so people can keep joining in.
Great. Yeah. And in terms of people who might be interested maybe in getting access to someone who is certified to, administer the MBTI, what are some of the things they should keep in mind?
So just in terms of if you're looking for someone to take you through an MBTI,
or just like, in terms of thinking about, there's so many different assessments out there, why would people choose MBTI or look for someone who could do the MBTI with their teams or even themselves?
Well, I mean, if you work with people on any level, if you interact with people on any level, I do see it adding enormous value. It does. It gives you a nice way to interact with people. It gives you a nice way to understand people. So if you're working with teams, for instance, it's an incredibly useful tool just to give teams a way of interacting with each other without getting personal. So instead of being really irritated with somebody because of their response, you can just depersonalize it and something like will the extroverts respect this moment of silence? The introverts need to just need to marinate for a minute, and it becomes a little bit of a joke. It becomes less of will you blabbermouth stop talking and give the rest of us a chance to think. So from that perspective, with teams, better understanding of each other, understanding and also who potentially would focus on certain things more naturally, and maybe lean into that strength. It doesn't mean that they're good at it. I'm not saying that your preference means that you are good at something, but it will tend to be your focus. So perhaps you'll see things in a way that other people might not see, and just be able to that understanding that somebody else might have a really good perspective that I'm missing. How do we combine our perspectives to make us more effective as a team? Because I mean, I'm sure you know that teams that are very alike tend to get to that performing stage a whole lot quicker, because there's a lot of groupthink, so there's less to work through, less difference to overcome. But teams with a lot of differences, a lot of different perspectives, are very often the more effective teams. In terms of coming up with new ideas that your team, your groupthink team might miss. So if you're working with teams, it's great. If you're working self-development, awareness and understanding of yourself. So in the coaching space, it's a fantastic tool to use there. I know we have had historically, as premarital counseling, giving couples the opportunity to understand themselves, understand their significant others better. Okay. So it's fantastic in that, and again, it's before you get into all of that, you have an understanding. How are we probably going to communicate? What is your style of communication going to be? How does it align with my style? Do we need to be aware that we might be talking past each other because we approach things differently? And then also managing conflict. How are we going to manage conflict? Because with any relationship, at some level, there's going to be some sort of conflict. You're not always going to agree. So how do you manage that appropriately so that you can move forward? It was John Gottman who had a look at couples and relationships, and it's not that the happy couples never fight; they just fight better. And this sort of thing can help with that. How do we argue or debate something constructively so that we both come away stronger at the end of it? If on any level you're going to be managing change, which sounds like all of us every day at the moment, the MBTI is a really great framework to address that. So genuinely, if on any level you work with people, the development of people, you know, I see it having enormous value in that space. So yeah, it can be applied everywhere.
Definitely, definitely. I actually never had even thought about the marriage one, but that, I think it really, it does. I think it can be applied to any conversation. And like you said, it allows you to take sort of a step back and not personalize it, because that's really where a lot of conflict goes wrong, when you're really personalizing it and then people really take it personally. So using, you know, using those pairs to have the conversation, I think can be very effective. I love that.
Absolutely. And I think I've got one of my favorite, he's a writer, a speaker, the School of Life, he's based in the UK, so Alain de Botton. Okay. I'm not sure if he pronounces his name the same way I do, but he speaks about one of the biggest issues with romantic relationships is the romantic or the romance. He says this whole concept of romance is quite problematic because of it creates expectations. And I think you know, if you were a little bit more objective about the way that that you handle the relationship, and that how do we manage communication. How do we manage conflict? How do we manage our different approaches? How do we manage our differences? Which is how, in any corporate team, how people would engage. You kind of almost took that mentality. You'd probably find you would be more effective, rather than expectations that the one that you love must just know because they love you, which isn't entirely fair. So yeah, no, but he's fantastic. Just the way he speaks about relationships, it makes a lot of sense.
Well, thank you so much, Kirsty. I think that every time I have a conversation with you or you share something with me, I learn so very much. So yeah, do you have, I don't know, any last words for people about what you do or about how you ended up in this space? Anything else you want to leave people with?
Well, it really was a journey. It was not my plan. I was going to be a nurse when I was about 8, and that didn't pan out quite the same way. But it has. It's been such a fantastic journey. And I think a big chunk of my learning is that it is a journey. There, you don't want to race towards the end goal, because you miss so much along the way. And to be perfectly honest, what I thought the end goal would have been, even 5 or 6 years ago, it's not where I am now. So just taking it each day as it comes. And I think also just the fact that I've taken such a scenic route to where I am now means that I've bumped into new pieces of information, that I can pull into where I am now and just kind of add so much more, I think, add so much more value. And I genuinely, I'm looking forward to the rest of the scenic journey. I hope it's not a straight line. I hope there's lots of pit stops along the way, a lot more information to find, and people to bump into, and twists and turns to see where I reach, the space at the end. I don't want an end goal, to be honest, because then you reach it and then what?
Yeah.
So yeah, no, it really, for me, the journey has been the best part of it all.
All right. Well, thank you so much again for your time, and yeah, I look forward to continuing our conversations and continuing to talk MBTI.
Yeah. No, thanks very much. It's been fantastic. I've really enjoyed this. So thanks very much for inviting me.
All right. Bye.
Cheers. Take care.